the moment, my family and I have the sad task of dismantling my mum's home and clearing her house. And in her house were quite a few things that I'd kept there myself, partly because when I moved out from my old life, which I will tell you about in another video or two, and came to the old shop, I had to put lots of stuff into storage, and my mum kindly looked after quite a few things. But she was already looking after some of these parts of my past, which are quilts, or wall hangings, I suppose you would call them really. A long time ago, before I went to art school and changed direction really, I used to make these patchwork and quilted wall hangings, and I designed them myself, and I hand dyed the fabrics and hand painted some of them. You can see on this one actually there's lots of painting and stenciling and then cut up with silk paints. So this is what I used to do before I went to art school, and then I kind of felt I'd reached the end of what I could do with it, and I wanted to get much more broad, which is why I did that. So I started doing patchwork when I was very young. I was about 18 I think, and I found a pattern in the road in the snow one winter, which was an old women's magazine which had got a pattern or sort of design for a patchwork quilt, and I was really intrigued by it, and I made my own patchwork quilt to have on my bed at my mum and dad's house, because that's where I lived at the time. And then after that, when I left home, I started doing a lot more patchwork and quilting, and I quickly went from using other people's patterns to designing my own, which I'll show you in a minute, some of them. And this was in the 1980s by now, early 80s to start with, and then I started exhibiting them and selling them, and I used to go in for these championships and won these rosettes and things like that, and I wrote some articles which were in magazines, which I might find one or two and show you those as well in a minute. But anyway, to cut a long story short, I used to sell them. And a lot of the ones I ever made I have sold. They used to take me possibly about 3 months, and I used to think that I'm probably only earning about 50p an hour because they took hundreds of hours to make. I could perhaps make 3 or 4 in a year. So I've had to bring the ones that were left. These are the ones that I hadn't sold for one reason or another, and I brought them back here to the old shop. So I thought, as I've got them here at the moment, I'm not quite sure what their future will hold. I thought I'd show them to you and just sort of tell you a little bit about the ideas behind some of them. As I say, bear in mind a lot of them, especially the ones that I exhibited, are now sold. I have been for a very long time, in fact. So it was quite a surprise to me to see a lot of them, or I say a lot of them, I think there are about 5 or 6 in total. But the one which we're looking at now, it was not a surprise at all, because it was I'd given it to my parents and it was hanging on their landing wall, so I just took it down and brought it home. And this was a really simple quilt, but I loved the colours of it, and it just shows you a few of the ways I used to work with them, because all these colours that look like harmonious here, colours I dyed myself. And as we look through the other quilts, I'll kind of tell you a little bit more about how I used to do that. You can see in the middle section here as well these colours that go together. Some of them are bought fabrics, and I sometimes used the wrong sides of them to make the colours more subtle, or I over dyed them with dyes as well, so they all blended in together, because that was the kind of thing I used to really like colour wise, and I still do. Some things don't change over the years. You can see this area here at this end, you can see it quite dramatically really, how there are lots of very subtly different shades from each other. And after a while I developed this idea that I was just going to use simplest shapes, like some of the squares would be 2 triangles like that, and some would be 4 little triangles like that. Some of them were just squares if they are painted. These are all painted with fabric paints. I think they were silk paints, and this one's been quite simply finished with hand quilting. You can sort of see the quilting lines on it, and some of the areas I think I tied down here with slightly different colours of red threads. Again, I wouldn't just use one kind of red thread. There are probably 4 or 5 different shades of red there, which even if you don't really notice it sort of, well, I hope anyway, it added to the richness of the overall effect. I think this is one of the last ones I did before I went to art school, or decided that I was going to go in a different direction. It's a bit brighter than a lot of the ones that I've made, but it was based on a summer theme of hay bales. So you can see how I've done these spirals, which are based a little bit on the idea of how hay bales are twisted round in spirals. And it also echoes the central section here. And these spirals here they actually came from a rubbing that I took of a spiral carving on a Norman doorway in Norfolk. And you can see here how I've painted that on, or stenciled it probably, onto that fabric as well. So they're alternately one way up and the other way up. And you've got the spirals as well in stitching here, lots of stitching on this one. And then the summer sun, because it was definitely a summer lammas, I suppose, kind of theme. I don't know if you can see really in the video, but these fabrics, that I didn't make those, they're bought fabrics, but they've got actual gold and silver. They actually shine with a little bit of shine for the sun in the summer. And the meadow edges here are like the edges of the fields where they're the wild edges. And again, I think I'd got to the point here where I used to do quite a lot of tying with embroidery threads, and those greens, I mean, probably actually see just there, those greens are different from each other. So I used to try and vary the colours of even the embroidery threads. I had quite a lot of different ones. You can't really get an overall picture because I've got no way of hanging them up on the wall here, although they do all hang up, but I always used to. I'll probably turn this one over and find I didn't, but yeah, I always did make a loop for hanging them up on a slat or a cane or something. So that's that one. Now this is an earlier one, and this was a set of 4 that I made, and they were based on the King Arthur legends, or at least on some postage stamps. There were a set of 4 stamps that came out in 1985, September 85. I looked it up actually recently because I had the 4 postcards. I don't know whether they still do, but they used to, Royal Mail used to issue a set of postcards for each set of stamps that came out so that you could have a bigger image of the pictures on them. They were often very beautifully designed. And this was a set of the Arthurian legends. And I took these images and I kind of made them abstract and graphic. So I translated them to the little units that I used to use, like these squares in diamonds in squares, and the little triangles. Actually, I used strips here, but I've inserted little triangles into them. And here's more of these squares that are made up of triangles, but loads of different shades. Again, lots and lots of hand-dyed fabrics in there, and the wrong sides of other ones. And well, you can see they're quite subtle. And you can see actually it shows it quite well, the video, I think, or the quilting that I did. All that's hand done. And this one, I had 4. I made 4, and I'd sold 2 of them. I think I've sold 2 of them. There's one of them I did not want to sell, and that one actually I couldn't find at my mum's, so perhaps I did sell it. I can't remember now, but I'll show you a picture of it because it was actually used as the front cover on a quilting magazine back in the day. Anyway, this one is called. Well, I say it's called. It's about. It's about Sir Galahad, and he's kind of kneeling down with his sword and searching for the Grail, I think basically is what he's doing in this one. So that's what this. So you've got the kind of colours of the chainmail and the background, the sort of woodland. He's got woods in front of him, and like a little bit of light coming through. This kind of dusky light coming through. It's very abstract, so you have to kind of use your imagination. But I still love the colours and everything. I mean, it's interesting because this is a really long time ago. How old would I have been? Was I still in my 20s? Yes, I would have been about 25 when I made this, perhaps, which is a long time ago. But I still like the colours and everything. They're still kind of ones I'd choose now. Another thing I used to always do, I don't know if you can see on this quilt, but it's on all the quilts really. I used to bind the edges. I used to use all different fabrics around the edges as well, so it was changing there. Because again, I just love this thing where the colours are more or less the same, but there's just these subtleties in them. Having shown you one of the set of 4 Arthurian quilts, they were called Pendragon, by the way, Pendragon 1, 2, 3 and 4, although I can't remember. The one I really loved was called Pendragon 1. which, as I say, I'll find a picture of somewhere, I'm sure, to show you. But this one is called Arthur and Merlin. Now, I don't know whether, because I can't really get far enough away from it really, but I'll try. But this figure here is Merlin, the pale colour, with his druid robes, and he's leaning over to talk to King Arthur, who's in these reds and purples here. And then you've got stars here, gold stars behind them. And then you've got woodland here. I think they're in a forest clearing, and you've got the little chinks of golden light coming through. And then under their feet, you've got more of the colours here. And again, you can see, it's actually quite good looking at it through the camera like this, because you can it really picks out the quilting lines, which I would have put that into a big round hoop and then embroidered it all, or quilted it all by hand, a little obviously with needle and thread, but just a section at a time. But I must have worked out beforehand, I can't really remember now, it's such a long time ago. I must have made a template and kind of just drawn around that to know where to stitch, I imagine anyway. This is the last one that I have here. It's quite an early one, and it's the biggest one, and I won't be able to show you the whole thing easily in this way, but it takes up almost the whole of the top of a bed. Not that it's meant for a bed quilt, it is a big wall hanging. It's called Winter Greenfinches, and as ever, I've done a lot of the dyeing of the fabrics myself, this kind of acidic, do you call it acidic yellow or olivey? I don't know what you call it really, but I know I dyed all of that anyway, so you can see how the shades are lighter and darker. And then I over dyed some of the fabrics that I already had so that they would then blend in as well. And I think I must have done the pinks as well, because you can see I wanted a very bright pink for the face. I say for the face, I don't know whether you can even see their green finches, but this was a pattern I developed really early on when I started doing the hand dyeing. This was in the 80s, I guess it was in the early 80s, I can't remember now. Anyway, I started by making this quilt called Kingfisher quilt, which again I might better find a picture to show you, and that used, when you did the dyeing, you had 8 buckets lined up, and you used to dilute the dye a little bit more. I mean, it wasn't natural dyeing back in the day, but you used to dilute the dye a little bit more in each bucket. So you'd have 8 different shades going from dark to light, and then you could obviously dye your fabric in it. And the first 2 colours I did were a terracotta-y colour and a kind of bluey green colour. And I made a quilt called Kingfisher, where I did just the same sort of thing as this. I kind of took a bird and I abstracted it and made it into a block and then repeated it. Then I developed a new one, I suppose that's the right word, designed, I suppose the word is, and it was called Chaffinch, and it was based on a chaffinch colours, or a male chaffinch actually, and it's the same, again I might better find a photograph, I sold it a long time ago now, but it's the same colours as, not the same colours, the same pattern as this one. So rather than chaffinch, I called it greenfinch and used these colours, and in fact it's called winter greenfinches because all around I made it larger, and all around the edges have got these pale colours like a wintry landscape. So it's green. I think it was inspired by seeing greenfinches in the snow in my very old house a long time ago, and I made the edges coloured like the greenfinch as well. I'll just go around like this, you can see how the edges change colours to reflect the colours inside. So that, as I say, is the last one I've got here. I might find when I go back to my mum's and dismantle things a bit more, there might be a couple more, I don't know, I can't remember now. I'd forgotten quite what was there anyway, so it was quite nice to discover them again and bring them back here. I thought you might like to see them too. I found some old magazines and actually old photograph album as well, so I thought I would just show you a little bit more as now I'm in memory mode. This was an article I wrote about these Pendragon quilts 1, 2, 3 and 4, and I was lucky enough to get it published in the quilting magazine at the time, a long time ago now. And it just showed the photographs of the postcards, so I thought you might like to see those because I don't think I've actually got those postcards myself anymore, or if I have, I don't know where they are. I was pleased though because it shows so clearly the relationship between the quilts themselves and the pictures they were inspired by. You can see that in 1985, when the stamps actually came out, postage prices were a lot less than they are now. They're Arthur and Merlin there at 17p. I think that was second class then. This was actually a front cover. I think there were a couple of times that the quilts were shown on a front cover. This is just a detail from Pendragon 1, and it's from 1988, I think. And here's the first quilt I ever designed from scratch, and it was based on the song Message in a Bottle by the Police. So you can see how long ago that was. It's about, bottles all coming drifting to shore. Just put a few pictures in that are just from photograph albums, so it's me photographing a photograph, but you can see how they were. I used to put them up on a wall, or in that case it wasn't a fence or a shed, I can't remember now. As I say, it was a long time ago. That was a garden wall. I do remember that wall, and that's one of the Pendragons. This was the Kingfisher quilt I mentioned, which is gone a long time ago, with those first lots of hand-dyed fabrics. You can see again those shades that I was able to make and made up the block as well. This one was called Squirrel's Dray, I think, and that was a similar idea, lots of painting in that one. You can see the kind of, I don't know what the word is really, but sort of flowing, more of the flowing effect in the colours. This one was inspired by a line in Romeo and Juliet, as a rich jewel in an Ethiop's ear, which I just thought was such a gorgeous, gorgeous line, and that the central jewel is made out of silks. And you can see lots and lots of African kind of patterns. Well, that's what I hope to evoke anyway, a sort of bleached African landscape in the background. And I can't believe now how many little tiny pieces I pieced together. All those little squares are only about an inch, I think, tiny. This one was based on dovecots seen up north in, I think it was in Cumbria probably. Took photographs of the dovecots let into barns. Often they're little holes in barns in different patterns. So I think I photographed lots of those, and then again used the old hand-dyed stuff. This one was another one based on a song called My Joshua Tree. I was heavily into U2 at the time, and it was the first one where I put two pieces together. So I made a small quilt and then tied another shaped quilt on top of it with kind of fabric ties that I made. And this one is the chaffinch. I tried something new for that one as well, with those little triangles at the bottom, which are kind of three-dimensional or stick out from the surface. And this is the one you saw on the bed, but you can see it now hanging up on the wall. And this here is called the Green No quilt, and it's another article I wrote about how I came to make it and to go and show it to Lucy Boston, the author of The Children of Green No, my favourite book. So that was a real joy to be able to do that, and there's a little picture of it in colour. This was one which was based on the seashore. I liked this one. I don't know what's happened to it. I probably sold it, but it's got the sea on one side and the shoreline on the other side, and little traily bits with shells on at the bottom. And this is the last one, but it's the hay bale summer quilt that you saw earlier, but I photographed it when it was made on an actual hay bale. I've been having a little look around the garden, front and back, to sort of try to work out how to approach the garden this year a little bit better, I suppose, so that it doesn't get so out of hand and I'm able to maximise the yields of the crops, which is very important, even though it's such a young garden, because, well, everyone knows about the food prices. Of course, at the same time, it's very important to me to maintain everything I can to help to support the wildlife that visits the garden and in fact even makes its home in the garden. Speaking of which, I did notice just a moment ago one of the molehills, which always is sort of joy, but this one here has got a hole in the middle, which I assume is where a mole has emerged at some point, not while I was around, of course. At the moment, it's easier than it normally is to see across the fledgling forest because everything's died back. So this is a really good opportunity to have a good clear and decide which of the trees I need to cut down to make them into more of a shrub layer, and which I suppose will have to come out all together. Just to give you a quick idea, a vague idea of what I'm thinking now, I mean this is all liable to change, is that this area here, which was completely choked with bindweed last year, has got wood chip down, and it had a whole kind of area with wood chip to start with when I planted the trees, with the idea I'd have some grass just here, and I would still like some grass just here, and a fire pit, so paving or just some stones around a fire pit. Where I'm pointing the camera at the pile of bits and pieces, but I guess it will be approximately just there anyway where the fire pit would go. It's a bit of a stretch of imagination at the moment. And where these pieces of wood are around the edge, this isn't any kind of hard or fast idea really. It's just when the garden was just one big, I've just pan across here. It was just one big open area because it's all bulldozed. And then it ended up just as an up and down area of bare earth, packed earth, and then weeds or unwanted wild plants. They weren't unwanted really, but they weren't how the garden was going to be coming up, and I just didn't know what to do about it at all. So in the end I had someone come and they built me a compost heap and a path at the other side of the garden, and also I had this they put these pieces of wood, which are actually pieces of wood from the house. There were pieces that were, a lot of them were the old floorboards, most of them were I think, or came from one of the sheds, and they put them to make like a bed along the edge of the wall here, and also the raised beds, which are actually falling to pieces now, and it comes round the corner here, and we see buckets and things, and it just kind of ends just there really. So it's a bit it's not really quite what I would want, but I don't quite know what I would want is. So I think it's just going to be still a question of feeling my way. I think eventually these pieces of wood will be able to be taken away. They just gave a bit of structure while I was working out how to divide the garden up. And this area here, it's very scruffy beyond it, but we'll pass over that for now. It will get sorted. So this bed here I had as a herb bed, and one of the easy things to do is going to be to cut this down now. Well, I'll probably leave some of these lovely pom-pom things from the horehound, and while they're still standing for a little bit longer, and they're also protecting the new growth at the bottom, but most of it I'll cut back now because it's quite good to get a sense of how things are going to be, and also I can mulch around everything, give everything a little bit of compost. Another little thing I've started to do is to clear around the trees in this side as well, which it does make you realise, it is going to be a garden again, and all the trees you can see, all these bare trees you can see are fruit trees and fruit bushes, nearly all at least. So that's lovely to realise that as well. They were really choked last year, and I don't want that to happen again. I'm going to do my absolute best that they shouldn't be. Some bulbs coming up as well. I'm not sure what they all are, but we'll find out soon. Some of them I know are just blind bulbs that have come up again and again, and they're not really much use for anything, but I don't know quite what they are even. I think they're a kind of paper white. I don't know. Hopefully I'll manage to get it sorted. Sometimes actually you can probably hear from my voice I'm a little bit daunted by it, and I fantasize about things like finding a narrow boat somewhere to live on and just getting rid of 3/4 of what I have, maybe more. And then I come across something like this little clump of crocuses, which I didn't even know were there, and they're so beautiful, and it just really cheers your heart. And there are also quite a few hellebores out because it's very much a hellebore time of year, so I shall show you some of those as we go around. There's some in the front garden and some in the back, and they're some of my absolute favourite flowers, and there's lots of different ones as well. So again, they are a real boon to this time of year because it's just so wonderful when they reappear, and you almost forget that they're going to, and then there they are. There's some snowdrops down here. They look like nice double ones. Yeah, they are. Look at those. I put a few clumps in last year, so it might be one of those. I'm not sure if they've all survived or not. But but we'll probably come across one or two anyway. And there's some hellebores here. I don't know what sorts they are. They're not the Christmas rose type of hellebore. They are a different one. That might be a Corsican one. And there's another one here with the finely divided foliage. But I love green flowers anyway, and it's just such a lovely thing to have. The ones in the front garden are mostly pink ones, which are probably my very favourite ones, or the very dark pink ones are. I can see some more snowdrops down here. And again, they're these fat ones, which you don't usually see in the wild. You often find them in churchyards for some reason, the double ones, I've noticed. So I've got a little fire going. It was just smouldering and then suddenly it's just taken, so I'm going to put some more bits and pieces on there while it's going straight up. It's not too windy, it's windy enough to get it going anyway. I'll be able to use the wood ash that's left afterwards as well. I don't like to burn too much because obviously the green stuff that you can compost down, or even a bit of the brown stuff, the twigs, I'm cutting them up fairly small and I'm putting them on the compost, but there's just so much dry stuff that I don't think the compost heap will turn into compost if I put it all on. So I'm having a little fire. Also, of course, you can make habitat piles, which is the word Colette uses for them in Beelton the Cottage, the video channel that I've mentioned quite a few times, and I know quite a few of you do know that channel. But Colette makes what she calls habitat piles and piles up the prunings from her many plants in her garden. But she's got 3 acres, and so she's got a fair space to do to find corners and areas for her habitat piles. This is only quite a small garden compared to that, so I haven't really got a lot of space to put habitat piles. Although what I do is I tend to put some pile stuff up along the back. I'll just actually show you rather than just keep looking at the fire. Along the back, where it's all rough, but where it's going to continue to be fairly rough along the back by the hedge, I can put piles of sticks and things there. But it's such a wild garden, and it will always be, to an extent, even though I'm trying to grow as much food as I can, it'll always have wild corners, and so I'll be able to do that, to recycle stuff. And what I'm finding at the moment, I'll just sort of show you where I've been working, is that you can start to see a pattern of where the trees are and where I'm going to be cutting down the smaller bushes like hazel, for example, and dogwoods, so they'll be in between the trees. I think I will still have to lose a few, well, I say lose, but find homes for a few of the trees. I think I was a bit over ambitious with some of the non-fruiting trees as well. It's lovely to have them, but they are a lot of trees out in the wilds here, like lots of chestnut trees. I've got, I think, 4 or 5 sweet chestnut trees, which of course would grow enormous over time. And I think I just misjudged it. The whole of everything I'm doing, I have to hasten to add, is an experiment, because I don't really know what I'm doing at all. So I think just by doing bits of it, you get to make your own little rules up. Like, for example, I'm thinking that falling over a tree, where there are lots of fallen leaves, I mean the chestnuts in particular leave all these big leaves, I think they should be allowed to stay where they are. I mean, someone will correct me if I'm misjudging this completely, because that would make a woodland floor naturally. Whereas where there are things like thistles that are only growing because there's enough light, because the trees are so tiny, that all the trees are so tiny, I think they should come up, all the dry stems from things like that, or anything else that wouldn't grow once it's a proper woodland. I think I should take those up and let the other things come through. That's my thought anyway. So I'll see how it works, but I'm trying to restrain myself from picking up the actual leaves, because what will happen over time is, of course, they'll rot down and become leaf mould, and that will help the trees to grow more. So it's all a lovely cycle. I'll tell you what I've just noticed. I'll just go across, make my way across so I can show you. And what I've just noticed is, this is an alder tree that I'm under. I'll just see if I can pan upwards so you can see the catkins, and there's some cones. One of my lovely pride and joys is not the one I usually show you, which is near the path. It's actually somewhere in the middle. What I noticed was that down by where it starts, and it's thickening up considering it's only been in for 2 years, is that it's got all these little shoots coming up from around the bottom. And I love that, because when you look at the alder trees in the alder car, that's exactly how they are. They've got lots and lots of twiggy bits all radiating from the bottom. So it becomes, you know, you actually sort of see it as its true self, as a typically itself, really, an alder tree. And that will be the same of lots of the others. Of course, they're doing what that variety does. With the hazels, I've noticed the same thing, that there are lots of small shoots coming up from the bases. Oh, I tell you, a blackbird has just landed in one of the trees. And that's one of the things that makes me very happy as well, because imagine having trees that are big enough for a blackbird to land on. When you look at this end of the woodland area, you can see what kind of task I've got on, really, because I haven't touched over at this end yet. I started at the other side, so I think I better just get on with this, and then we'll be able to have a look at it at some point. We'll have a look at it and see it once it's a bit clearer, and maybe it'll be easier to have an idea of where it's going. Although sometimes I don't feel equal to the task of being its custodian. At the same time, it just takes something like seeing a wren landing on one of the branches, or a blue tit, which does happen quite often, and suddenly, you know, everything's lovely again, and I'm so delighted just to feel part of it all, really, just to blend in here with the other inhabitants of the garden. Well, I've been working for a while now. I'm feeling quite a bit better about it. I think if I just do an hour or so every day that's nice enough to do that, then you know, it'll make a difference. I think we're running out of space on this video, but I thought before we go, I'll just quickly show you exactly how the front garden is at the moment. In other words, it's still in its winter slumber. And I thought if we look at it now, just very quickly, not in detail, I'll be able to show you what it looks like when I do another video. You can see that it's basically in a real mess. Even some of the paving slabs can hardly be seen. All the wood chip has been shoved over them in the winter. I think creatures have been scuffling, and most of the shell, I had this cockle shell, as you can just about see little bits of still, to define the areas between the slabs, and that is more or less all gone. So I think I might just buy another bag of that, because I thought that was quite good. And then yeah, basically it's not going to take much. It's such a tiny space, as I always say, that it's not going to take much at all to get this sorted out, and then it'll be quite a lovely thing to be able to show you. You can see here, hopefully these will be out when we look again. These are the hellebores, which beautifully come back by themselves every year, and some of them even, that's nice one's out, look. Some of them were even here when I came, so that's lovely to know that they are so happy here. You can probably hear that the birds are making a little bit more noise now. I don't know if I'll be able to show you, there's a sparrow in the hawthorn. Let's see if we can see it. Can you see? And the whirring of wings, which is always lovely. Anyway, less lovely is the sight here, really, but it will be a great pleasure to see it all sorted. It'll be good to get the pond all unchoked and cut back as well. I mean, I'm just itching to do it, really. The sun is usually on this front garden just late morning and in the middle of the day. So tomorrow I'll try and get on with that if I can. I'm seeing some quite mysterious sights, actually, which I will talk about a little bit when we come back. I think we'll just finish this shot on some buds, because that's such a hopeful thing to see on the hazel tree. Well, there are two little hazel trees, and they're both looking quite happy. I think even the garden guardian is going to be taking off his cloak and hat, even though it's still a little bit chilly, but I think it's just a gesture towards the coming spring. So I shall do that as well. And we'll come back again soon, so I hope you'll join me. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye from me, goodbye from the garden guardian, and goodbye from the frog.